I'm just about to upload a video about a place called Llanon. And what happened there? Of course, I left out what happened the day I arrived there and the day I was evicted from there. I might as well record both of those. So much malice. And so unnecessary. And I most certainly am going to name these people because they've never been prosecuted for what they did, or even hauled over the coals for it. I employed a removal firm called Act Vans of Neath. Act, A-C-T, of Neath, N-E-A-T-H. Well, they were due to come on a Saturday, because I was due to leave on a Monday. And I had to hand the keys in by midday on the Monday. So they phoned me on the Saturday and said they could no longer make it. And of course, by then, it was too late to get anyone else to do the job. So they arrived, well, then they said they would be there at the prearranged time, which I think was 9 o'clock on the Monday morning. I thought that was cutting it fine, to pack everything up and get my keys into the office by midday. And in the end, they came an hour too late. So effectively, actually, they were damn nearly 48 hours late, really. More. And there was nothing I could do about that. Well, far from being apologetic, because I was extremely anxious. I said, when they arrived, we weren't going to get it done in time. I got the keys in, like I told you. They didn't like that. 2 men. Mind you, I have had other all-male removal firms. One that was absolutely great. Yeah, let's hear it for Tregaran Removals. These 2 men were vile. Act Vans. Before we had even left the flat, they had broken an antique wardrobe that had belonged to an antique walnut wardrobe that had belonged to my great aunts. It was locked, and I had left hangers inside, nothing else, just hangers. And one of these men ripped open the door, took out all the hangers and flung them on the floor. And of course I was supposed to leave the place clear of everything, not leave the floor littered with hangers or anything else. And I said, what did you do that for? I mean, I should have called the police. Again, I should have called them. Because they had committed criminal damage before we ever left the property. What did you do that for? Oh, I didn't like the jangling noise. The noise was getting on my nerves. I said, you realise you've broken it? He said, no. I haven't broken it. I said, well, it was locked. And he said, give me the key. I don't know if I did, actually. I presume I must have. I was pretty much in their hands. There was no one to help me. Not that could undo what he'd done. He had broken the door. He'd broken the lock. Then, I can't remember everything, I must admit. Although it's pretty clear in my memory. I had a 3-seater settee. It was beautiful. I absolutely loved it. It kind of matched this armchair that I sit in. But, as I say, a 3-seater settee, and it was so comfortable people slept on it sometimes. That they left upside down in the garden. And they said they would go back for it. They never did, and a neighbour told me that it had been destroyed by rain. All this is before we had even left. I then, of course, arrived late at the offices to hand back my keys, which potentially should have cost me, actually, another week's rent. And then they refused to follow directions. They didn't have a sat-nav. And they didn't have a map. I did. And, of course, I knew the area well. And when we passed through Ostrad Gunlice for the second time, I said, we're going round in circles. No, we're not. We were losing time to arrive at the other end as well. Of course, we were supposed to arrive at the other end by a certain time. No, we're not. So we've just passed Ostrad Gunlice twice. When we arrived, they dumped approximately half my stuff in the hall outside my new flat, which made the hall impassable. And there was no way down. Well, there were two staircases, but they were along. It was a kind of circular place, so to get along the corridor and down the stairs would take at least 5 minutes. And from the balcony outside my flat, I watched that van drive off with half my stuff still in it. I later got accused of having shouted at them. And although I had every justification for shouting at them, I never shouted at them, they shouted at me. And again, I would have called the police, except for a so-called friend. And by that time I was terrified of the police, absolutely terrified, with very good reason. We're now in 2011. My so-called friend said, get that stuff out of the hall, or I will call the police. So I couldn't do it now. I single-handedly shoved the furniture and the boxes into the flat. The trouble was there was no way ever to sort it after that. It was a tiny, tiny, tiny flat. And if it had been put in right, it could have been sorted. But after that, minus another removal team to take it all out and put it back in again, I could never get it sorted. And I never had access to the kitchen in that flat. I couldn't get into it. Which is why I had to use the communal kitchen. So that was the beginning. Act fans of Nice should have been prosecuted. And, the friend who threatened me with the police, I did ask her later why, and she couldn't answer, was going to be my witness at my eviction hearing. So then I come to the far end of Llannon. The day I left. Well, the day I was evicted. It was a closed hearing. And I had one witness, and this friend was the witness. When it came to closed hearing, they locked her out. They wouldn't let her in. They put her in another room and left her there. And no one else was allowed in. That was the first time. This would have been April, May of 2011. I'm not quite sure how long after the 22nd February incident. And the police were there, and that was when I discovered my criminal record. This long list of things, the vast majority of which I had never done, and of which I was completely and utterly innocent. But it was read out there to prove that I was antisocial. I might have said somewhere that in the last 3 years I had been fairly antisocial, but I never was before. Still not really. I mean, I like talking to people when I can. But now breath is a problem. I considered that place to be a dying room, and as it turned out, that's exactly what it was. And the man in the flat before me had died there of emphysema. Shortly after growing tomatoes on the premises, in the flat, in that greenhouse. So that's a little bit about that's a little bit about the privatised social housing, which has taken over from council housing. God help us all.